Welcome back, Bill. Thank you, Greg. Everyone who was here 2 weeks ago has been looking forward to you coming back. This is part two of our discussion on Buddhism and Christianity and the things we can learn from Buddhism, things everyone can learn from everyone else. And so, I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly where we left off, but how shall we begin, Bill?
Well, you left me with a very good question, which I worked on the whole way home. And again, with my wife this morning. So I hope to get back to that. That was, let's imagine a young person comes to Buddhism and they say, I'm here for peace. What's all this about suffering?
Oh, that's right. The first precept of Buddhism is that all life is suffering.
So we might come back to that, but I don't want to start there. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to all the people online. It's great to be here. I'm just going to start by lighting a candle, symbolic of many things. Light. The Buddha once said that the most important thing was to light your own lantern. Light your own lantern. Then you shall know how to work with the world. And if you remember 2 weeks ago, I had an incense stick, symbolic of the sweet fragrance that a life well lived gives off, symbolic of impermanence, that were I to light this, I won't light it because it's a shared space, someone might have a reaction to it. Once lit, it will surely burn out. Once we're born, we'll surely die. This is natural law. But I thought I'd start, I've been in a training, a real, very profound training. We went right into the depths of reality, life. So I thought I might just start us with a familiar passage from my great uncle's King James Version. This is from the opening of John, well-known passage. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled, of the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it, and bear witness, and show unto you that eternal life, which was with the Father, and was manifested unto us. That which we have seen and heard, we declare unto you. And it continues on. It was a beautiful, poetic passage. I'm sure you may not be familiar with the King James, as I was not that familiar with that. It goes on from there to describe Jesus, that which was with the Father and has become manifest. So I'm here to talk about Buddhism, Buddhist experience. Why am I starting with John? All of Christianity, in a way, most of Christianity is about the revelation of God through Jesus. What Jesus said, what he did, how he was with people. And yet here in the beginning of John, it points to, it says, he was with the Father from the beginning and has been made manifest, has moved from a hidden place with God down into manifestation, into a physical body. And Buddhism is all about that place from whence he came, if you will. All about the silence, the unmanifest realm. One Jesuit author, a Jesuit priest I studied with, Father Tom Hand in Burlingame, California, liked to talk about the Father as this kind of primordial, something like the emptiness of Buddhism, that place where all potentiality is present, is possible, all potentiality is present, and yet nothing is per se, there's no form. So Buddhists say, well, these words, they have tremendous value, and all the sutras, that the teachings of the world of Buddhism would not fit in this, maybe in the entire church space, certainly not in this room. So there have been a lot of words and teachings, but they all want to point back to dropping into that primordial space. I want to just invite you for a moment just to drop into whatever that means to you, that sense of silence and space. I invite you to close your eyes if you like. I invite you to relax into what's present before words. Kind of awareness. And might just practice being aware of your breath for a moment. Noticing what it feels like to breathe and inhale. What it's like to breathe and exhale. Ears open, receiving all the sounds of the room. Body open, soft, receptive, feeling all the information that comes through the senses. Is there relaxation? Is there anxiety? Is there whatever there is? Just notice it now. And maybe let it go one step deeper into an even deeper experience of the vastness, the endlessness of that primordial awareness. So this is the place that Buddhism goes to. I remember one retreat, a bunch of Buddhists at it's a Protestant retreat center in Abiquiu, New Mexico, near where Georgia O'Keeffe lived. And there was this bunch of Buddhists there for an event, and the Protestants were all having lunch. And they were so noisy, and the Buddhists were like, oh, these noisy Protestants. But, you know, Protestants have a lot to teach Buddhists. There's not much social outreach in traditional Buddhism. But this silence, this love of silence. So I went on 5-day silent retreats, 21-day silent retreat. If you like, there's a 3-month silent retreat. If you like, there's a 3-year silent retreat. If you like.
How much they cost? They cost money, don't they? Yeah.
It depends on your status. If you're a monk, it's all paid for, kind of like being a Catholic priest. Paid for as part of the deal. We met a hermit that had, I don't know, he hadn't spoken in years. All about the silence, like layers of an onion is a common metaphor in 12-step. The silence can just go deeper and deeper and deeper to try to descend or open into this kind of spaciousness that's ever present, that's the unmanifest, present before you were born, present after you die. That which is not never born and never dies. There are some parallels in the Christian scriptures there that I won't dive into too much. So that's what it's all about. It's a very different orientation. And the kind of, I think I said this last time, the kind of, for a monk, the kind of trajectory is to do your basic practice, ascend the mountain of transfiguration, if you like, have the transforming experience of a deep immersion in that aspect of reality, and then transformed by it to come back down the mountain as a helping hand, as a bodhisattva, somewhat free at least from the systems that drive this ego-driven world, this ego-driven persona and personality that most of us inhabit most of the time. That's kind of what it's all about. I want to give you lots of time for questions. I also thought what I didn't do last time, I said, well, you can read it on Wikipedia, and I felt a little dismissive when I thought about it. Just the brief story of the Buddha. Born around 563 BC, died around 483 BC, said to have lived 80 years. There's a lot of kind of mythological add-ons to whatever may have actually happened. A prince destined to take over the realm, the Sakya realm. It's in Nepal, in present day Nepal. A seer said, well, he will become either a great leader or renounce the world and become a sage. So his father tried to shelter him from seeing the world, didn't want him to become a sage, wanted him to become, to inherit the kingdom. But the young prince made 4 trips out with the help of his friend, 4 trips out of the palace, which changed his life. On the first, he saw an old man and realized that there's old age. On the second, he saw a diseased person and realized he'd been kept from seeing any of this. There is disease. On the third, he saw a dead man, a corpse, being carried away, and saw, oh, this life ends. All things he'd been sheltered from. And on his 4th outing, he saw a monk, a renunciate. And this alighted in him a desire and interest in finding a way out. It's my head. Okay. And so it said, and these are highly mythologized texts. He went out and for 6 years, he practiced studying with all the teachers of the area, all the ways to meditate. He tried extreme asceticism, almost to the point of death. You can see a figure called the starving Buddha, ribs totally, he's totally famished, ribs exposed. And at that point, he said, well, this isn't an end. And with resolve, he said, I'm going to sit down here and meditate until I come to a resolution of this matter. And the mythological story is that he sat in meditation for 7 days, during which he went through all kinds of trials and realizations about the nature of reality, at the end of which he looked up, saw the morning star, and everything became clear. He had realized Buddhahood, he had awakened. And just, these are, what I'm telling you is what they've written thousands of books about. But if I have to summarize, one of the things he said was he could see that everyone had the nature of enlightenment or awakening, the Buddha nature, you might say, within them. Everyone without exception. He saw that. And he had, through his effort, transcended his identification with this isolated self. The self we often feel like self versus the world, myself, my group versus other groups. He had transcended that and found a place of unity with all life.
And there was something John about Buddhism, what was it? That was something John?
No, I'm just saying, John, I brought John in because it points to that unmanifest realm that Buddhism is all about.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you for asking. He said, what I discovered is so profound, so subtle, I can't be taught. It can't be taught. I don't know any way. People would misunderstand this. And so I simply won't teach it. But then seeing the suffering of the world, there's a story that seeing the suffering of the world, his heart was touched. And he said, well, I have to do something. And so he resolved to do the best he could to share the teachings with other people. He taught for 40 years until his death. So there's a lot I could say. I have a little handout that kind of gives you a summary of his teachings. You know, it was what, 400 years before anything he taught was written down. So there's an oral tradition, and so there are the 3 marks of existence, the 3 refuges, the 5 precepts, the 6 paramitas, the 8-fold path, the 4 noble truths, you know, designed to kind of make it easier for you, if you're a devotee, a follower, a member of a community, to follow. So maybe I want to share a little bit about my story too, just briefly, but are there questions at this point that we might pause for? It's coming up, yeah.
Is there a prayer that is maybe the most common that might be that they might use, or similar to, you know, the Lord's Prayer? Is there something of that nature that has existed?
That's a really good question. You know, one thing that Buddhism has undergone major changes as it moved from country to country and over the millennia. So that the actual basic teaching in early Buddhism was to never be born again, to escape suffering and never be born again. Hinduism was all about the cycle of life and birth and death. And then when Buddhism moved to China and some of the other, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, the new ideal became to awaken to a taste of freedom and then to willingly reincarnate and be a helping hand and come back over and over. I said this 2 weeks ago, as say the Dalai Lamas said, to have reincarnated willingly over and over to share. So it's hard to point to one thing within all traditions, but one, and prayer is a funny, there are sometimes prayers, there's a kind of dual nature to Buddhist practice in Asia, in traditional societies. There's a lay practice for the lay practitioner that works in the world and is probably married. And then there is the practice of monks and nuns, which tends to be more toward a rigorous seeking for awakening. So they would have different things. One of the things that one of the things I've encountered across cultures, Buddhist cultures, is a going for refuge and in the three jewels. So the three jewels, I forgot to write this down. I used to joke that the three jewels were like the one on Sheridan, the one on Devon, whatever, in North Grove. But the three jewels of Buddhism are the Buddha, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the community of the community. And so there is a practice of going for refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You might say something like, well, I go to Buddha, the awakened one. I go to Dharma, his teachings. I go to Sangha, the community of monks and nuns. That would be a practice that many people do daily. For a while, I was chanting that in Pali as my daily practice when I lived at a Zen center in Chicago. So that's a common practice. Also, I passed out last week a little sheet of paper with the Sutra on Loving Kindness, which is very popular in the West as a basic teaching. I thought we might end by reading that.
Monks and nuns not married?
It depends on the tradition. It depends on the tradition. Often not, sometimes yes. And in the US, yes, usually.
I'm struck by your presence, the calmness, and the ability of Buddhists to relax and look at the whole thing. I'm wondering how you fit that in with world politics. Do you ever manage to try and influence that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Buddhism has traditionally withdrawn from involvement. It's kind of pushed away at the world. It's had a subtle push away from the world, encouraging renunciation, right? So that's a new growing edge for Buddhism, engaged Buddhism. People like Joan Halifax at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, she's very involved with engaged Buddhism. She's on social media. She has a post right now about the challenge of keeping your heart open in the face of the global situation.
Great question, Nancy.
Yeah, that is
We
a
could,
great
we could
question.
spend hours just on that, couldn't we?
We sure could.
How many Americans first heard of Thich Nhat Hanh as another Vietnam War protester?
Okay.
Because we're talking about peace, we're trying to live in peace. But look what's going on.
Right,
In
right.
my country, it's
Right.
being invaded. If he's not gonna say anything, then, I mean, his peacefulness inwardly, while the whole world just burns around him.
And Buddhist passivity has been an issue at times. Yeah,
I have that image of a horrific image, I almost hate to share it, that's often shown in news media in Vietnam of the Buddhist monk, I guess it was a Buddhist monk, setting himself on fire
right,
and almost completely at peace.
right.
And obviously as a protest. And I keep thinking, my goodness, I don't see how. I guess he believes he's gonna be recycled and his
Right,
life
right.
is coming back and, or how he maintained his poise in the midst of what happened. But it's powerful statement to have someone say, hey, this is not right.
Yeah, and that's a very extreme example, certainly not something that we talked about as part of normal,
Buddhism.
yeah,
right?
normal, I mean, there are, I would say that the gift of practice, of mature practice, is to be able to be still, open, to receive and see what the situation truly is, to notice how it's triggering different instincts, and to have the freedom to do the right thing in the situation. No matter what personal stuff may be coming up. You have the freedom to do the right thing.
But when you practice, you go into silence and you don't try to hold on to thoughts. You let them be and don't judge and be in the space, the big space. There are times I find something comes up, maybe an insight. And I feel like I'm breaking my practice sometimes focused on that, but sometimes I feel like it's out of the silence that maybe awareness comes. So I don't know how Buddhists deal with, or when you're practicing, when you're having things that come to you. And that's when you're practice.
Yeah. No, that's another good question. Thomas Keating, who teaches centering prayer, which is very similar practice. Remind me, I just want to say in response to that, and then we'll hear from Thomas Keating, who teaches centering prayer, which was inspired somewhat by his practice, Buddhist practice. He liked to say, and I heard him say it a few times, if during your centering prayer, the Blessed Virgin Mary comes down and sits next to you and teaches and wants to offer you the wisdom of the world, you should say to her, not now, my dear. Prayer. That to me, that's not where I am right now, but I think it's kind of for a beginner, which we're all beginners in a way, who, yeah, there are all these wonderful insights. So the kind of hardcore teaching would be, let them all go, because we are so defended against dropping into that deeper place.
That's very true.
We're so defended against that. And all these thoughts are about, I have a thought. It reinforces the I sense. I have a brilliant insight. Keating used to also say, if they're really good, they'll come back to you later. Not always true, I will say. And these days, I like to go into that space, and in that space, I figure out what I'm gonna do in a workshop like this. It's a very creative space.
Right.
That's a different use of that space than for realizing enlightenment. Yeah.
When you say I have an idea, is that going back to the focus on the ego? You think?
Yeah, so the I creature, this I sense is so pervasive. And we come in, we get a body, and we get a personality, and we get an I sense. And with that, we are set loose to do good or ill, or a combination of both. But that self-centeredness, it's what is constantly asking, how am I doing? Am I bombing? Is this going well? Oh, it's going well. Well, what a fine speaker am I? Then later I suffer. Or, oh man, it's terrible. And I suffer. So the I thought, that self-referential thought, is in Buddhist thought at the root of our suffering. I think there's something about that in Christianity, to die to oneself and come alive in Christ and God. Is that what you're asking me?
Doesn't it seem that a lot of what is Buddhism or American Protestantism comes out of where they were? I mean, Buddhism came out of a very crowded, poor country. And so they certainly had a goal in a way of quietude, whereas American Protestantism came from a wide open country with lots of opportunity. So I think that each would have been shaped by their.
Absolutely. And when you look at American Buddhism, it's wanting to be co-opted by wealthy white Americans as a tool for enhancing their productivity and, don't harsh my mellow and, and just chilling out and becoming a billionaire, hopefully. And so Richard Gere is a popular figure who has embraced Buddhism publicly, Alice Walker, there are many. And this is it remains to be seen what's gonna happen here.
Alice Walker, really, I didn't know that.
Alice Walker and,
But part of Buddhism is letting go of things, so
Right.
how much are they letting go? I mean,
well, you have to ask, you have
the
to,
financial piece or.
you have to ask that, and yet maybe for where they are, maybe it's a good step. And maybe it's a path to transcending
Right.
we all have our motivations for whatever going to church, going to temple, going to the ashram. I thought that I was gonna become sexier and, attract a lot of attractive young women and deal with all my anxiety issues and, oh man, I came up against all my issues,
Right.
and found some freedom from them and the women thing never really worked. Probably to the best. Yeah.
So the first time I was exposed, at least I believe I was exposed to this world you're talking about was through this artist we know as the Beatles. Now, what do you think they were trying to convey to us as a Western culture in bringing back their perspective that they experienced in India?
I can't really speak to their motivation, but it was a big deal in the 60s and the 70s. A lot of Americans went east looking for gurus, I think because of a dissatisfaction with American culture, and that has to some degree continued. Yeah. So what I would suggest, the new American Bodhisattva ideal is to develop some freedom so that we, go up the mountain enough that we can come back down and really be a helping hand. And to be not to be apart from the suffering, but to live right in the midst of it and to find in that peace, joy, meaningful life, and to be able to help, to be able to really help. And I think there is a clarity and wisdom that comes with the practice in that way. How am I doing? Social.
I wonder, would you be, as a Buddhist, against promotion, like the Philadelphia Inquirer has all the news fit to print or something? Could you have a paper that is not Republican but Buddhist and would have a saying up at the top?
I was thinking about having a Buddhist militia. Fighting the battle against duality. I was thinking about having a Buddhist moment on the evening news.
Yes.
And now we turn for the Buddhist news. George,
Oh,
all is in radiant suchness, pervading all the three worlds. Peace, abounding spaciousness, all is beautiful as it is. Meanwhile, in Gaza, so, this is kind of it's actually a Christian view too, that all is beautiful right now as it is through God's eyes. And that's why these iconic portrayals of, say, Jesus the Pantocrator, Jesus, he's not smiling and happy. This is not a Disney image. There is like a radiant joy, but also, it would be dismissive to have a big smile on your face and say, have a nice day, when you are also aware of all the atrocities of each moment, of all the suffering of each moment. So how can you be open to both the radiance and beauty of this moment and the absolute horror of this human life experience? That's really like, that's it in a nutshell. If you can be in that place, I don't care what your doctrine is, that's a good place to be able to operate from.
Thank you, the Buddha and the Christ, that's the same thing.
I think it's very much, I mean, this is, I don't really identify. I identify as Buddhists when I'm, I wear Buddhist clothing. But I also wear Christian clothing, and I also I forgot my beads. Today,
Sometimes Buddhism seems a bit disembodied. We really
we'll
believe
see,
in incarnation, and the incarnation is so important.
right,
And Judaism and Christianity is very materialistic religions. And I don't want to dismiss the 99% of myself that I spend time developing all my life and
Right.
say it's irrelevant.
right,
So that's my big struggle with Buddhism, is because it seems a bit Gnostic, like Christian Gnosticism, and which got wonderful insights and value, but at the same time, why would we care for the creation if it's just gonna be me in this space and we don't need to care for the environment or anything else?
well,
Other than compassion being the central part of Buddhism.
see, I'm 90, I completely agree. When I went to Korea I lived in a Zen center in Chicago for a year and a half, one in Ann Arbor for 2 years. As part of that experience, I went to Korea with my Zen teacher. And I had just finished my PhD in biochemistry. And so I had to make one call at University of Michigan. I had to make one call to the Radcliffe School of Graduate Studies from Korea to make sure that something had been processed correctly. So here we are at Haeunsa, which is one of the crown jewel temples of South Korea. And I had to make a phone call. And so arrangements were made, and made my phone call, everything was in order. Said through my teacher, said, you can get a PhD, but without enlightenment, it's worth about 5 cents.
Well,
Worth about 5 cents. And I actually had a little bit of that in me at that time, otherwise I wouldn't have been on the path that I was. But I think that this kind of dismissiveness toward engagement with life is a big growing edge for Buddhism. It really is. And because of everything you said, and I think that's part of the new American ideal, is to be fully engaged, be married if you want to be married, be whatever station in life you want to have, but to have a taste of awakening, so there's that freedom and inspiration coming into whatever your station in life is.
the problem in American is more particularly the ego, or the I becomes so dominant in who we are. It's just, I can see it, the challenge of it too, but Buddhism has compassion, and compassion means being able to feel in your body something that you feel the experience that's happening in the real world, and they don't seem to mind having a moment of pleasure and really taking a pleasure and making good contact with the pleasures of life. It's not trying to hold on to it. It seems to be my read of it, but I guess I'm reading that correctly. I'm not sure.
I think so. I think that definitely applies to traditional Buddhism. But then, in this country, I would stick my neck out and say some American Christians are kind of standoffish about the transcendent experience.
Yeah.
It's scary. That's scary too. I mean, if you're a monk, it's a little scary to go out and get involved in the world and all these things that might happen. But it's also scary to let go of what we know and to undergo that transformative experience. So I think the two belong together, and really the meditative practice should inform your action, and your action informs your meditative practice.
Is there,
Go ahead.
is there sin in Buddhism?
Right. People would say, so I lived in the temple in Ann Arbor for 2 years during which I finished my doctorate. And people would sometimes say, must be so peaceful there. Must be so wonderful. And I said, oh yeah, like the fact that the priest was sleeping with this guy and then they broke up and then he went ballistic, that didn't upset me at all. And the fact that, I mean, it was really hard. Some of that is not original teachings, obviously. Well, sorry, repeat your question again, I went off on a tangent.
So, you went into a meditative state. So is there sin?
Oh, right.
Was there view of sin?
Right, there's no sin, it must be so great, and you know, just everything, it's all cool, no problem. No worries, man, whatever you want, it's all good Buddhism. No, there is definitely, so in Buddhism, there are 108 defilements. There are 108 ways in which your perception of reality and response to what you perceive might be thrown off by stuff in you that ultimately needs to be purified. That's kind of the hardline stance. So what do you do about that? You do selfless service, you do your practice, you give to the poor, you do prostrations, maybe you do chanting, to work on your defilements. It said our nature is originally calm and pure, but through involvement with the world, we become defiled. We become dirty. And this, like the Buddha nature in all of you is just shining out here. But maybe I can't see it because of my defilements.
Well, those 10 commandments looking pretty easy.
Just for a second, if anybody at home is trying to speak up, please take yourself off mute and join us. Rebecca, JS, Ben and Lynn, and yeah, if you can hear us.
You have questions or thoughts?
They've all attained nirvana.
Yes, that's all right. Let us know.
That's laughter's a giveaway.
Thank you, Ben.
Yep. No, I think Bill, you're doing a wonderful job in the conversation. I've explored Buddhism myself. I think a wonderful thing too to point out is sort of something I would like you to speak to is the modality of receptivity and clear sort of awareness that is nurtured in Buddhist practice. And you know, I think that's something that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, well, just what he said, the practices tend to really foster deep receptivity, to be able to be so open, like there's a porosity that allows, I would say, communion with the natural world and other people in the sense of like feeling everything, feeling a sense of connectedness to everything. One person described enlightenment as intimacy with all beings. Intimacy with all beings. And that includes rocks and streams, air and clouds. Intimacy with all beings. We're not separate. The separate sense constantly says we are, but we're not separate. We are, we are deeply related, interconnected. And that's where I think American Buddhism or whatever, future Buddhism, because it needs to be in Asia too, needs to embrace outreach, because out of that sense of interconnectedness and that intimacy, if my friend is suffering, how could I not respond? Like the Buddha said, I can't teach this, it's impossible. But then out of the suffering that he saw, he said, well, I have to do something. So I think that is a clear future direction for Buddhist religion.
It seems to me that Saint Francis was of the same thinking. And also the Celtic body, the Celtic, orientation toward life is similar.
Yeah.
As well as the indigenous community.
Yeah.
Connected.
I agree. And Alan mentioned, embodiment. Actually, the Buddhist meditation tools like breath awareness meditation is a really great embodiment tool for people that have dissociated due to childhood trauma, adult trauma. It's a really great tool for like being fully here and feeling pleasure, ripple throughout your entire body, not just in this device up top, but your whole body.
Does that help separate them from the memory of the trauma? It's like.
I would say no, the path is always through the pain. To be able to feel the pain and release it.
Okay.
And if there's a victim, I had childhood trauma. If there's a victim, I'm a victim, I'm traumatized, that's the I person speaking. So it's true historically, I am a victim of childhood trauma, I was traumatized. But also, if I let go into the enormity of what I am, that's like 0.1% of my total identity.
Buddhism, would you say is accredited with the practice of meditation? Because, it's becoming more and more popular in the US. But, for centuries ago that Buddhism began, set.
Well, meditation's in all religions.
Right.
And the Hindus before Buddhism meditated, with the Buddhists meditate, the Christians meditate, everybody has some kind of meditation. There's so many different practices. So many different practices of meditation. But the thing that we hear about is mostly is mindfulness meditation or versions of it. And that was a great watershed for mindfulness in the world was through John Kabat-Zinn, who wrote Wherever You Go, There You Are, Full Catastrophe Living, and several other books. He was interviewed by Bill Moyers, and he was practicing Korean Zen Buddhism, and he had a vision. He had a short vision that has ended up manifesting over the last 50 years of bringing Buddhism to people without any of the cultural clothing, purely as a self-help technique for physical, emotional, mental well-being. And in there, he believes that if you do all that, it's going to also on-ramp you to the spiritual kingdom as well. But the presentation is purely secular. Lowers your blood pressure, lowers your pulse, helps you deal with trauma. It's huge right now.
Bill, since 15 days ago now, when we started learning with you.
Yes, and I had one thing, and that is people at my age, a younger kid here. We watch this people at my age, and for the last, from here to the beginning of this class, I don't know, 2 hours ago, we watched that on your thing, and all we saw was his body, and there's a light right behind him.
Oh, should I?
And all we see was the lights, that light.
Oh, sure.
See, but that's how people at home
And
see.
all we, and other people my age
That's
would
horrifying.
be.
It's your halo. It's your.
Right, see? Oh, I'm so enlightened.
To the owl, yeah, you're just a beam of
No, I
light.
thought, and yes,
And I was
right, I should charge more. It's good to monetize your enlightenment.
Is there a perceived conflict or an actual conflict between Buddhism and the Winnetka Congregational Church or Christianity or I mean, could you have a Buddhist service or a Buddhist educational session within the churches of America without everybody exploding and
Some of you will remember Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, different drum and some other. He tried to introduce silent meditation at that time in the church, into schools. You know, and it was too controversial.
Depending on the institution, some would be more open
Yeah,
to learning from other cultures than theirs. But, you know, like the last 2 weeks, it's been fantastic. You made me really try to focus on these two people. And maybe they were talking about the exact same message, just happened to be from different parts of the world in different centuries. Speak different languages. And just a little bit of Googling in the New Testament, I think it was Philippians. Jesus at one point has this, I don't know the whole plot line, but I think the Greek word is kenosis. Christ experienced what he called, I'm emptying myself.
Self-emptying.
Kenosis, right? It's a self-emptying. That sounded immediately, from my Western perspective, as something that Buddha would have experienced or taught as well.
Seems like a good entry point to dialogue.
Yes.
Too. Yeah.
And what did that mean to Buddha? Is there something really, really similar? And what is self-emptying?
Yeah, you know, I haven't seen that exactly addressed,
Okay.
but it has been.
Okay.
There's been an active dialogue between Buddhist and Christian monks for a long time now. Long time. So we just have 3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 more minutes, please. Anybody at home or here? Any other questions? This is. Otherwise, we can just finish up the trees.
I did, the reason there one Buddhist,
I didn't see Chuck's hand, I'm sorry.
Buddhist chef said, no sugar, no enlightenment, so I.
Well, it's actually a request. Is there some way we could get an electronic copy of your notes that have these insights, like the 108 developments? And it seemed like there was a half a dozen sort of basic precepts of Buddhism. And you said we had received something last week. I never received it or was conscious of it.
Well, there was something I handed out in class at the end, and I have a copy again today.
Is there something that you?
I don't
And
think,
there's something I
emailed to
emailed, which I
Well, then
intended
I
to
could
go to the Zoom participants.
I just, you know, I think everyone's email here. Tonight, I can just send those materials to everybody here.
That
if you do that, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
I wasn't conscious of receiving it.
And 108 is not that, it's not that difficult.
You'll be enlightened.
I hope so.
So maybe we could just stop or end with a minute of silence. It was the first teaching the Buddha ever gave, was awareness of breathing. So as we began, I'll watch the clock and we'll end at 1:45. I invite you to look around the room, see that this is a safe place. And then allow your eyes to close if you like. To let your awareness open to infinity. Just be with your breathing for a few minutes, a few moments here. Every time you start thinking about something, be aware of it, notice it, just return to the next breath. Just a little loving kindness blessing to send you off. May we all be filled with loving kindness. May we all be filled with loving kindness. May our bodies be strong and healthy. May our hearts be full of love. May our minds give peace. May we all be filled with loving kindness. Thank you very much, everyone. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you for your
to be with
time.
you.